Okay, today I'm going to show you how to build a receiver coil from start to finish, all in one video. So here are the materials you will need. You will need at least 1,464.2857 feet of wire. I recommend buying 6,290 feet of 26 gauge magnet wire on eBay because it is $58. That's the best deal. You will also need at least 395 feet of 14 AWG magnet wire. You will also need a coil form. I used a quick tube from the Home Depot, and the circumference of it is 25 inches, so the diameter is 8 inches. You will also need at least one 3-volt 20 milliamp LED. I recommend getting a different color besides white because you can see different colors better. You will also need two 1N4007 diodes. And you will need sandpaper. The total cost of all the materials should not exceed $140 if you build a coil exactly like mine. The wire is the most expensive part. So before you wind your primary coil, you should know that I'm transmitting the electricity at 168 kilohertz or 168,000 hertz. That means that the receiver coil primary needs to be wound at 1/4 of a wavelength of 168 kilohertz. This is 1,464.2857 feet. So since we want the quarter wavelength of 168 kilohertz in inches, we will take the quarter wavelength in feet and multiply it by 12 to get it in inches. Now you will want to measure the circumference of your coil form. This coil form has a circumference of 25 inches exactly. Once you have measured your circumference of your coil form in inches, divide this number by your circumference to get the amount of turns you will need of number 26 wire for the primary. Once you have wound your primary to 1/4 of the wavelength of 168 kilohertz, you will want to tune your primary to resonate at 168 kilohertz. So to tune your primary to resonate at 168 kilohertz, you will need an oscilloscope. You will also need some sort of a metal object. I recommend using an empty soda can if you don't have a toroid like this. And then you'll want to connect the ground on your oscilloscope lead to one side of a 4 kilo ohm resistor. And you will want to connect a 1N34A diode with the line on the diode facing the metal can or a toroid, whatever you use. And then you'll want to set your oscilloscope probe to 1X. Also on the ground lead of the oscilloscope probe, you'll want to ground this to an earth ground. You will also need a signal generator capable of generating up to 20 volts, and you will need it to be able to generate a sine wave. And it must be able to go up to 168 kilohertz. So to tune your primary coil, you will want to keep it clear of all objects and people for at least 4 feet. You will also need to raise your primary coil off the ground at least 2 feet on a non-conducting surface. Now to the bottom of your primary coil, take the wire coming off the bottom, sand it really well so that all the insulation is gone off the end of the wire, and then connect it to the negative of the signal generator. The positive lead of the signal generator should go to an earth ground. So you have grounded your oscilloscope probe to an earth ground, and you have grounded your signal generator to an earth ground on the positive lead. So here is a schematic explaining all the connections. Maybe this will explain it better. Here's the oscilloscope, here's the 4 kilo ohm resistor, and here's the 1N34A diode. And there's the empty metal soda can or toroid. So the sensitive part of the oscilloscope probe, which is the hook part at the end, connects right there, and the ground of the oscilloscope probe connects right there and goes to an actual earth ground. And here's the receiving coil primary, and the bottom of the primary connects to the negative of the signal generator, and the positive of the signal generator connects to an earth ground. And there should be at least 2 feet of space in between the primary coil and the soda can. And the soda can should be 2 feet away from the top turn of the primary on the receiver coil. So here is my tuning setup. I have actually spaced the toroid 1 foot away from the top turn of the primary on the receiving coil. So this is how to tune your coil. So you dial up the frequency until you find the frequency the coil is already resonating at, which probably won't be 168 kilohertz, and you'll have to adjust it by spacing the top turns to get it to resonate at 168 kilohertz. But I've already tuned this coil, so I will show you what 168 kilohertz looks like when the signal generator is set to this. You see the biggest wave, and I'm only using 5 volts. And by the biggest wave, I meant the wave on the oscilloscope. So once you have tuned your primary to resonate at 168 kilohertz, and it is a fourth of the wavelength of 168 kilohertz, you will want to wind your secondary. I use 14 AWG magnet wire. So originally I had 4 turns on the primary coil, or the secondary coil, excuse me, and I had it connected like this. So these are the two 1N4007 diodes, and this is the LED. It does matter which direction the LED is connected. And I had a ground connected on one side of the LED. Well, I found I could eliminate the ground if I turned the frequency up to 426 kilohertz. So I figured I needed more turns on the secondary, and I could eliminate the ground connection for the light bulb at 168 kilohertz. And I was right. So I overwound the coil so that I could get this to occur below 168 kilohertz, and then I slowly changed the spacing of the windings, and I subtracted some windings on the secondary to get this to occur exactly at 168 kilohertz. And so now the light bulb only lights up and is the brightest at 168 kilohertz. Not only is the light bulb the brightest at 168 kilohertz now, by the way, the light bulb's on the secondary coil, not the primary. And but when I move closer to the coil, it detunes the coil and the light bulb will quit lighting up. That is why it's important to tune your coil with things as far away from the coil as possible. Nothing should be close to the coil, and it should be elevated off the ground. So after you tune your coil and it's finished, to connect your coil, ground the bottom of the primary to the best earth ground possible. And you will also still need to ground your secondary. Even though you tuned it without the ground, you will need to ground one end of your LED light bulb on the secondary. Use a separate earth ground from the primary. They in no way should connect except through the earth. Also, if any of the turns move on the receiving coil, it will detune it. So try not to move any of the turns. Like, leave them exactly where they are. I recommend winding tape on the secondary coil if that doesn't detune it. It might detune it. And I recommend stapling the primary turns where you space them. But don't break through the wire. If you cannot ground your secondary to a separate ground, I would recommend attaching a long piece of wire to one side of your LED on the secondary. So I recommend building your receiving coil to be exactly like mine. After you tune your receiving coil and are ready to use it, keep it clear of all objects still when you are using it, or it will detune and it won't work. And remember, for the LED, use a 3 volt 20 milliamp LED.